The great hall of the Galactic Council fell silent as Zektar Moonwhisper stepped forward. His blue-scaled skin bore deep scars that caught the artificial light, and his golden eyes held a pain that spoke of horrors witnessed. The Velnari warrior stood tall despite his injuries, his forearms crossed in the traditional pose of one bearing witness to great crimes. Council members from dozens of species watched with growing concern. The Velnari were known throughout the galaxy as the most honorable warriors, bound by ancient codes of combat that had kept galactic warfare civilized for thousands of years. If they claimed atrocities had been committed, the matter was serious indeed. "Honored Council," Zektar began, his voice carrying across the vast chamber without need for amplification. "I come before you today to speak of horrors that will shake the very foundations of civilized space. I come to tell you of the humans." A ripple of whispers passed through the assembled delegates. Humanity was still new to galactic society, having joined only 50 years ago. They were considered a primitive species, barely worthy of notice except for their unusual persistence and rapid technological advancement. "The humans," Zektar continued, "have committed acts so vile, so against every law of civilized warfare, that I struggle to find words in any language to describe them. They have violated the most sacred principles that have governed conflict between species since the founding of this council." The Theknari ambassador leaned forward, her crystalline features reflecting concern. "What specific violations do you claim, Warrior Moonwhisper?" Zektar's hands trembled slightly as he spoke. "They refuse to kill their enemies when honor demands it. They show mercy to the defeated. They heal those they have conquered instead of granting them the warrior's death they deserve." Confused murmurs filled the chamber. These accusations made little sense to the assembled delegates. How could mercy be a crime? How could healing the wounded be considered an atrocity? The Velnari warrior seemed to understand their confusion and pressed on. "You do not understand, because you have never faced them in battle. Let me explain what I witnessed at Kepler Station, where human savagery was unleashed upon my people." He gestured to the holographic display that materialized in the center of the hall. The conflict began, as it should, with proper declarations of war and rules of engagement. My people, under the command of War Commander Thekval, approached the human outpost with full honors. We offered them the chance to die gloriously in battle, as is the right of all warriors. The display showed the Kepler system, with its small mining station orbiting a red dwarf star. It was hardly an important target, but it had become a symbol in the border disputes between human and Velnari space. The humans accepted our challenge, as we expected. But what followed? Zektar paused, his voice catching. What followed was an abomination of everything we hold sacred about warfare. He activated another section of the display, showing tactical recordings from the battle. When our ships were damaged, the humans did not deliver the killing blow that would have honored our crews. Instead, they used some kind of energy beam to disable our weapons and engines. They captured our warriors alive. The Gornaki delegate, a massive bear-like creature, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Surely taking prisoners is not unusual. Many species— "You do not understand," Zektar interrupted, his voice rising. "In Velnari culture, to be captured alive in battle is the greatest shame imaginable. It means you failed to fight hard enough, failed to earn the glorious death that awaits all true warriors. The humans robbed my people of their chance for honor." The display continued to show scenes from the battle. Human ships maneuvered carefully around disabled Velnari vessels, using precise weapons to target engines and weapons systems while avoiding crew areas. When Velnari warriors attempted to ram their ships into human vessels in a final desperate charge for honor, the humans used some kind of energy net to stop them without destroying the ships entirely. "But the worst was yet to come," Zektar said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the vast hall. "When the battle was over, when my people lay defeated and dishonored, the humans committed the most heinous act imaginable." The chamber held its collective breath. They offered medical aid to our wounded. The silence that followed was deafening. Several delegates exchanged glances, clearly struggling to understand why medical aid would be considered an atrocity. Zektar saw their confusion, and his voice rose with passion. Do you not see? In Velnari culture, when a warrior falls in battle, they are meant to die with honor. To heal them is to rob them of their glorious death and condemn them to live with the shame of defeat. The humans forced my wounded brothers and sisters to survive their disgrace. The Altarian ambassador, her feathered head tilting in thought, spoke carefully. But surely preserving life is cruelty beyond measure, Zektar finished. I watched human medics work frantically to save Velnari warriors who begged to be allowed to die. I saw them ignore our customs, our beliefs, our most sacred traditions. They treated our wounded with the same care they gave their own injured soldiers. He paused, letting the impact of his words sink in. But even this was not the end of their savagery. After the battle, they did something that still haunts my dreams. They honored our dead. The display shifted to show a ceremony on the human station. Human soldiers stood at attention, while names were read aloud in both human and Velnari languages. Flowers were placed on a memorial wall bearing the names of all who had died in the battle, regardless of which side they had fought for. They built a monument to our fallen warriors, Zektar said, his voice breaking. They learned our funeral rites and performed them correctly. They sang our death songs and spoke of our courage. How can one honor enemies? How can one show respect to those you have defeated? It makes a mockery of everything we believe about warfare. The council members sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they were hearing. The human ambassador, a middle-aged woman named Sarah Chen, had remained quiet throughout Zektar's testimony, her face grave but composed. There is more, Zektar continued. Much more. What I have told you is only the beginning of their crimes against the natural order of warfare. The humans have shown us that they are not merely primitive. They are dangerous in ways we never imagined possible. As Zektar's opening testimony came to an end, one thing was clear to everyone present. Whatever had happened at Kepler Station had fundamentally changed this proud warrior's understanding of warfare itself. The question was whether the humans were truly guilty of the atrocities he described, or whether something else entirely had occurred in that distant system. The trial would continue, and the truth would eventually emerge. But already, some of the wiser delegates were beginning to suspect that this case might reveal more about galactic civilization's assumptions about war than about human cruelty. The holographic display in the council chamber flickered to life as Zektar continued his testimony. The image showed the Kepler system 3 months earlier, when the Velnari Third Fleet had approached the small human mining station with full military honors. War Commander Thekval was my unit leader, Zektar explained to the silent assembly. He was a warrior of great honor, with 47 glorious battles to his name. When the humans refused to abandon their illegal mining operation in our territory, he followed all proper protocols. He sent formal declaration of combat, giving them time to prepare for honorable warfare. The display showed massive Velnari warships, their hulls painted in traditional red and gold battle colors. Each ship bore the sacred symbols of warrior houses, and their weapons glowed with the ritual energy that blessed all Velnari combat. The humans had only 12 ships defending their station, Zektar continued. Small vessels, nothing like our mighty dreadnoughts. War Commander Thekval was pleased. It would be a good battle, with worthy opponents who would die with honor. The Velnari warrior's voice took on a tone of respect as he spoke of the battle's beginning. The humans did not flee as cowards might. They formed proper battle lines and returned our ceremonial challenges with their own war cries. For a moment, we thought they understood the sacred nature of combat. The tactical display showed the initial engagement. Velnari ships advanced in traditional formation, their weapons firing in the rhythmic patterns that had been used for centuries. The human ships responded with surprising coordination, their smaller size allowing for rapid maneuvers around the larger Velnari vessels. But then, Zektar's voice grew troubled. We began to see their true nature. When our weapons struck their ships, they did not respond with killing blows. Instead, they used strange devices that wrapped around our vessels like metal nets. The display showed human ships deploying what appeared to be some kind of energy webbing. The nets surrounded damaged Velnari vessels, preventing them from self-destructing, as was traditional when defeat became certain. War Commander Thekval was outraged. Zektar continued. When a ship is crippled in battle, honor demands that its crew destroy it, rather than let it be captured. But these nets prevented our ships from activating their self-destruct systems. The humans were forcing our warriors to survive their defeat. Several council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The concept of preventing an enemy from destroying their own ship was indeed unusual, though whether it constituted a war crime was unclear. The humans also used weapons we had never seen before, Zektar said, gesturing to new images on the display. Instead of energy beams that would cut through armor and grant quick death to our warriors, they fired some kind of stunning pulse. Our soldiers would fall unconscious instead of dying gloriously in battle. The display showed Velnari boarding parties attempting to take human ships by force, only to be met by defenders using non-lethal weapons. Instead of the expected fierce melee combat that would end with most participants dead, the humans seemed determined to subdue their enemies without killing them. Young warrior Sekhan led a charge onto one of their ships, Zektar remembered, his voice heavy with emotion. He and his squad expected to fight to the death, to achieve the warrior's paradise that awaits all who fall in glorious combat. Instead, the humans used sleeping gas and strange energy fields that paralyzed our warriors without harming them. The Theknari ambassador interrupted. But surely saving lives, even enemy lives, shows admirable restraint. You do not understand. Zektar's voice rose sharply. For a Velnari warrior, there is no greater honor than to die fighting. To rob them of that death is to condemn their souls to shame for all eternity. The humans were not showing mercy. They were inflicting the cruelest torture imaginable upon my people. The display continued to show the battle's progression. What should have been a glorious combat ending in mutual destruction was becoming something else entirely. Human ships carefully targeted Velnari weapons and engines while avoiding crew areas. When Velnari ships attempted ramming attacks, the humans used tractor beams to stop them without destroying the vessels. The final insult came when War Commander Thekval's flagship was disabled, Zektar said, his voice barely controlled. Instead of allowing him to die with honor, the humans boarded his ship and captured him alive. They treated his wounds and offered him food and water, as if he were an honored guest instead of a defeated enemy. The hologram showed the capture of the Velnari commander. Human soldiers in environmental suits carefully moved through the damaged ship, providing medical aid to wounded Velnari and evacuating survivors to their own vessels. The war commander, despite his injuries, was treated with obvious respect by the human boarding party. But the humans' crimes did not end with the battle. Zektar continued. When the fighting was over, they did something that violated every principle of civilized warfare. They tried to negotiate. And won. The display showed the aftermath of the battle. Damaged Velnari ships hung in space, their crews captured or dead. Instead of claiming victory and demanding surrender, the human fleet commander had opened communication channels with the surviving Velnari forces. Admiral Sarah Kim contacted our remaining ships, Zektar said, his voice filled with disgust. She offered to return all prisoners unharmed if we would agree to peaceful resolution of the territorial dispute. She spoke of diplomatic solutions and mutual understanding, as if warfare were some kind of game to be stopped when convenient. The council members listened with growing amazement. The human behavior described was indeed unusual by galactic standards, though it hardly seemed criminal. Captain Rekval, commanding our remaining forces, was so outraged by this mockery of proper warfare that he attempted one final charge. Zektar continued. Better to die in glorious battle than accept such dishonor. But again, the humans used their cursed nets and stunning weapons. They disabled our remaining ships without killing a single warrior. The tactical display showed the final moments of the battle. Velnari ships, their crews desperate for the honorable death that was being denied them, made suicidal attacks on the human fleet. Each time, the humans responded with precise, non-lethal force that left the attacking ships helpless but intact. In the end, Zektar concluded this portion of his testimony. Not one Velnari warrior achieved the glorious death that was their right. All were captured alive, forced to live with the shame of defeat. War Commander Thekval and 300 of our finest warriors were taken prisoner by humans, who seemed to view warfare as some kind of temporary disagreement, rather than a sacred trial of honor. The holographic display faded, leaving the council chamber in contemplative silence. What Zektar described was indeed unprecedented in galactic history. Warfare between species typically followed ancient protocols designed to ensure that conflicts ended decisively, with clear winners and losers. The human approach seemed to reject these fundamental principles entirely. But their violations of the laws of war had only begun, Zektar said, his scarred face set in grim determination. What they did to our prisoners was even worse than what they did on the battlefield. They committed acts of such cruelty that I struggle to speak of them, even now. The council members prepared themselves for revelations of torture and abuse. None of them could have imagined what Zektar would describe next, or how completely it would challenge their understanding of the humans who had so recently joined their galactic community. The warrior's testimony was far from over, and already it was clear that this trial would force the council to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of warfare itself. The council chamber remained deathly quiet as Zektar prepared to describe the treatment of Velnari prisoners. His golden eyes seemed to look through the assembled delegates, seeing horrors that existed only in his memory. After the battle ended, Zektar began slowly. I found myself aboard a human transport ship, along with 200 of my fellow warriors. We expected to be executed immediately, as is proper for defeated enemies. Instead, the humans committed their first act of systematic torture. He paused, his forearms trembling slightly. They gave us medical treatment. The Altarian ambassador's feathered head tilted in confusion. I'm sorry, Warrior Moonwhisper. But did you say medical treatment? How is that torture? Zektar's voice rose with passionate intensity. Because we were dying with honor. Young warrior Keth Iam had taken a blast to his chest that would have granted him a glorious death within hours. Instead of allowing him this final dignity, the humans forced him to live. They used their strange healing machines to repair his wounds, condemning him to shame for the rest of his existence. End quote. One force. The holographic display activated again, showing the interior of a human medical bay. Velnari warriors lay on treatment tables, while human doctors and nurses worked frantically to save their lives. What struck the council members most was the obvious concern on the humans' faces as they worked to heal their former enemies. Dr. Sarah Kim was in charge of the medical facility. Zektar continued. She was a small human female who seemed to take personal responsibility for every Velnari life she saved. When warriors Tekral refused treatment and demanded to be allowed to die, she became visibly distressed. The display showed a human doctor speaking earnestly with a wounded Velnari warrior, her hands gesturing as she tried to explain something. The Velnari warrior's face showed only disgust and shame. Dr. Kim told us that human medical ethics required her to preserve life whenever possible. Zektar said. She could not understand that by saving our lives, she was destroying our souls. When we explained that death in battle was a gift from our gods, she looked at us with what she called compassion. It was sickening. The Gornaki delegate leaned forward. But surely attempts to preserve life show benevolent intentions. Benevolent? Zektar's voice cracked with emotion. She forced medications into warriors who begged to be left to die in peace. She operated on soldiers who had already accepted their fate. Warrior Melkath had received wounds that would have sent him to the eternal battlefield where heroes feast forever. Kim spent 18 hours in surgery saving his life, trapping his spirit in a body marked by defeat. The display continued to show scenes from the human medical facility. What was most disturbing to the council members was not cruelty, but the opposite. The humans seemed genuinely caring in their treatment of the Velnari wounded. Nurses checked on patients regularly. Doctors explained procedures in careful detail, and medical staff learned basic Velnari phrases to communicate better with their patients. But the medical torture was only the beginning, Zektar continued. After they forced us to recover, they transported us to what they called a detention facility on Earth itself. What we found there was beyond our worst nightmares. The holographic display shifted to show a large complex surrounded by green fields and mountains. Instead of the expected fortress or dungeon, the facility looked almost like a small city, with multiple buildings connected by walking paths and recreational areas. They gave us individual rooms, Zektar said, his voice heavy with disgust. Not cells, rooms, with comfortable beds, windows that looked out on gardens, and temperature controls. They treated us like guests instead of prisoners of war. The display showed the interior of one of these rooms. It was clean, well lit, and furnished with basic necessities, plus several luxuries. Books, writing materials, and what appeared to be entertainment devices were visible. Worse than the comfortable accommodations was the food, Zektar continued. They studied our dietary needs and provided meals that were not only nutritious, but actually tasted good. When Warrior Dekmar complained that the meat was too tender, they learned to prepare it the way Velnari preferred. They were trying to make us enjoy our captivity. Several council members exchanged confused glances. The treatment described sounded remarkably humane by most species standards. But the true horror was yet to come, Zektar said, his voice dropping to an ominous whisper. They assigned each of us a counselor. A human, whose job was to talk to us regularly about our mental health and well-being. My counselor was a male human, named Dr. James Park. The display showed a middle-aged human man sitting across from Zektar in what appeared to be a comfortable office. The human's expression was one of genuine concern and interest. Dr. Park would meet with me twice a week, Zektar continued. He claimed he wanted to understand Velnari culture and help me adjust to my situation. He asked questions about my family, my beliefs, my fears. He treated me as if my thoughts and feelings mattered. The Theknari ambassador looked genuinely puzzled. But, isn't showing interest in a prisoner's welfare considered progressive treatment? You don't understand, Zektar replied with growing agitation. He was trying to make me forget my shame. He spoke of concepts like dignity and self-worth, as if a defeated warrior could possess such things. He told me that surviving battle was not shameful, but natural and healthy. He was trying to corrupt my soul with human ideas. The display showed more scenes from the detention facility. Velnari prisoners walked freely through courtyards, used libraries filled with books in multiple languages, and even participated in what appeared to be educational classes. Some prisoners seemed to be engaging willingly with their human guards and counselors. The humans also committed the unforgivable crime of contacting our families, Zektar said, his voice rising again. They sent messages to Velnari space, informing our relatives that we were alive and in good health. Do you understand what this means? They were telling our families that their warriors had survived defeat. The implications began to dawn on several council members. In Velnari culture, families of warriors who died in battle received great honor, but families of warriors who survived defeat. My mate Sarandra received a letter from Dr. Kim, Zektar continued, his voice breaking. It contained a medical report showing that I was healthy and recovering well from my injuries. That letter destroyed her status in our community. Instead of being honored as the widow of a fallen warrior, she became known as the mate of one who failed to die gloriously. The display showed copies of the letters sent by human medical staff. They were written in careful Velnari, expressing concern for the families and providing detailed information about the prisoner's condition and treatment. To human eyes, they appeared to be thoughtful communications meant to ease worried families' concerns. But perhaps the most insidious torture was what they called cultural exchange, Zektar said. They brought us books about human history, art, and philosophy. They showed us recordings of human music and films. They were trying to contaminate our minds with their perverted ideas about warfare and honor. The scenes showed Velnari prisoners reading human books, watching human entertainment, and even participating in discussions with human scholars who had come to learn about Velnari culture. Some prisoners appeared to be genuinely interested in these activities. Young warrior Rintal was particularly susceptible to their corruption, Zektar said sadly. He began reading human poetry and philosophy. He started asking questions about why humans fought only when necessary, why they sought to avoid casualties even among their enemies. The humans were turning him against his own culture. Worst of all, Zektar continued, they offered us opportunities to learn human skills and trades. They said we could take classes in engineering, medicine, agriculture, or arts. They spoke of helping us build new lives, as if we were refugees instead of prisoners of war. Some of my fellow warriors actually accepted these offers. The display showed classrooms where Velnari prisoners worked alongside human instructors, learning various skills. The atmosphere appeared collaborative rather than coercive, with humans and Velnari working together on projects. By the time I escaped, Zektar concluded this portion of his testimony, the humans had succeeded in corrupting dozens of my fellow warriors. These once proud Velnari began speaking of second chances and new purposes. They had forgotten the shame of their survival and embraced the human concept of redemption. The council chamber sat in stunned silence as the implications of Zektar's testimony sank in. What he described was indeed unprecedented, not because of its cruelty, but because of its apparent kindness. The humans seemed to have approached their prisoners not as defeated enemies to be punished, but as individuals to be understood and helped. But there was more to discover, Zektar said, his voice regaining strength. My escape from their facility revealed truths about human nature that chilled my blood and showed me the true depth of their threat to galactic civilization. The holographic display flickered as Zektar prepared to describe his escape from the human detention facility. The council members leaned forward, expecting to hear of daring breakouts and fierce battles. What they heard instead would challenge everything they thought they understood about humanity. My escape began 6 months after our capture, Zektar said, his voice taking on a different tone. I had been planning it for weeks, studying the guard rotations and security systems, but when the moment came to act, I discovered something that shocked me more than any weapon could have. The display showed the detention facility at night, its buildings peaceful under Earth's alien moon. Guards walked their routes casually, more like security personnel at a civilian facility than military guards watching dangerous prisoners. There were no walls, Zektar said simply. No force fields, no automated weapons. No barriers of any kind. The humans had built their prison as if they expected us to stay voluntarily. The Gornaki delegate's massive frame shifted in surprise. No walls? How did they prevent escapes? That was exactly what I wondered, Zektar replied. I walked out of my building in the middle of the night, expecting to face security systems and guards. Instead, I found only a human janitor who nodded politely and wished me a pleasant evening walk. The display showed Zektar moving through the facility's grounds, past buildings and recreational areas. No alarms sounded, no guards challenged him. No automated systems tracked his movement. I reached the perimeter of the facility and found only a simple fence, the kind humans use to mark property boundaries rather than prevent passage. I climbed over it easily and found myself in the human countryside, with no pursuit. The Theknari ambassador spoke carefully. I thought so too. Zektar said. But as I traveled through human territory, I began to understand the truth. The humans didn't prevent escapes because they believed we would eventually choose to return. The holographic display shifted to show Zektar's journey through human space. He moved through small towns and cities, expecting to be hunted as an escaped prisoner of war. Instead, he found a society that seemed almost unaware that a war had recently taken place. The first human settlement I encountered was a farming community called Millbrook, Zektar continued. When the residents saw me, clearly an alien and obviously wounded, they didn't call for security forces. They offered me food and medical attention. The display showed a human family welcoming Zektar into their home. Children stared at him with curiosity rather than fear, while adults fussed over his injuries and insisted he stay for dinner. The family's name was Johnson, Zektar said, his voice growing quiet. They had a son serving in the human military who had fought at Kepler Station. When they learned I was Velnari, they didn't become angry or afraid. Instead, the mother asked if I knew anything about her son's well-being. The scene showed a human woman showing Zektar a photograph of a young man in military uniform. Her eyes held the same concern that any mother would feel for a child in danger. I told her that human soldiers had fought bravely and honorably, Zektar continued. Johnson thanked me and said she hoped the war would end soon so that both human and Velnari families could have their children back safely. She spoke of my people as if they were neighbors who had temporarily disagreed rather than enemies who had tried to kill her son. As Zektar continued his journey, he encountered more evidence of humanity's strange approach to warfare. In every town and city, he found memorials that honored both human and Velnari dead equally. Museums displayed artifacts from the battle alongside explanatory texts that described Velnari culture with respect and accuracy. But the greatest shock came when I reached the city of New Geneva, Zektar said, his voice trembling slightly. There, I discovered something that shattered everything I thought I knew about human cruelty. The display showed a large urban area with impressive architecture. Among the buildings was what appeared to be a memorial complex, its design incorporating both human and Velnari aesthetic elements. The humans had built a monument to our fallen warriors, Zektar said, his voice barely audible. Not a symbol of their victory, but a genuine memorial to honor Velnari courage and sacrifice. The image focused on the memorial itself. Names were carved in both human and Velnari scripts, with detailed biographical information about each warrior who had died. Gardens planted with flowers from both Earth and the Velnari homeworld surrounded the monument. But that wasn't the worst part, Zektar continued, his composure beginning to crack. I arrived during their weekly memorial service. The display showed hundreds of humans gathered around the monument. They stood in respectful silence, as names were read aloud in carefully pronounced Velnari. Children placed flowers at the base of the memorial while their parents explained the importance of honoring all who had died bravely, regardless of which side they had fought for. Human veterans of the battle stood beside families of Velnari warriors, Zektar said, tears beginning to form in his golden eyes. They shared stories about the courage they had witnessed, about individual Velnari soldiers who had impressed them with their bravery and honor. They spoke of my people as worthy opponents who deserved respect rather than conquered enemies to be despised. The scene showed former enemies standing together in mutual respect, their shared experience of battle having created bonds that transcended species and politics. Human soldiers spoke of specific Velnari warriors they had fought against, describing their tactics and courage with genuine admiration. An elderly human veteran approached me during the ceremony, Zektar continued. His name was Colonel Martinez, and he had commanded one of the ships at Kepler Station. He recognized me from battle recordings and thanked me for my service to my people. The display showed the encounter between Zektar and the human colonel. The older man's weathered face showed no hatred or triumph, only the quiet respect of one warrior acknowledging another. Colonel Martinez told me something that haunts me still, Zektar said. He said that humans had learned long ago that true victory in war comes not from destroying your enemies, but from understanding them well enough to turn them into friends. As Zektar continued his journey through human space, he encountered more evidence of this philosophy in action. Former Velnari prisoners were living freely in human communities, not as conquered people but as welcomed immigrants. Some had started families with humans. Others had opened businesses or joined human institutions as equals. I found Warrior Rintal working as a teacher at a human school, Zektar said, his voice filled with a mixture of horror and confusion. He was instructing human children about Velnari history and culture, helping them understand my people better. The children looked at him with admiration and respect. The display showed Rintal in a classroom, enthusiastically explaining Velnari traditions to attentive human students. His demeanor was confident and happy, showing no signs of the shame that should have consumed a defeated warrior. When I confronted him about his betrayal of Velnari culture, Zektar continued. He told me something that chilled my blood. He said that the humans had taught him to see honor, not in death, but in building something better for future generations. The encounter between the two Velnari was shown in detail. Rintal's attempt to explain his new perspective met with Zektar's horror and disgust. The younger warrior had clearly found peace and purpose in his new life, which only made his betrayal more complete in Zektar's eyes. But the final revelation came when I visited the grave site, where they buried our fallen, Zektar said, his voice growing stronger as he approached the climax of his testimony. What I found there revealed the true scope of human psychological warfare. The display showed a peaceful cemetery where human and Velnari graves lay side by side. Each marker was carved with symbols appropriate to the buried warrior's culture, and fresh flowers adorned every grave regardless of species. Human children were playing among the graves, Zektar said, his voice filled with disgust. Their parents had told them stories about the brave Velnari warriors buried there, teaching their offspring to honor our dead as heroes rather than enemies. They were corrupting their own young with ideas about universal honor and respect. The scene showed human families visiting the graves of Velnari warriors, teaching their children about different cultures and the importance of honoring all who died bravely. It was a sight unprecedented in galactic history. Former enemies honoring their opponents dead as if they were their own fallen heroes. I realized then, Zektar concluded, that the humans represented a threat to galactic civilization, far greater than any military conquest. They were spreading ideas that could undermine the very foundations of how civilized species conduct warfare. They had to be stopped. End. As this portion of his testimony ended, the council members sat in stunned silence, struggling to process what they had heard. Zektar's description of his escape had revealed not human cruelty, but something far more challenging to understand. A society that seemed genuinely committed to treating even their enemies with dignity and respect. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council remained silent for long moments after Zektar finished describing his escape. The assembled delegates struggled to process what they had heard. Their understanding of warfare and civilization fundamentally challenged by the Velnari warrior's testimony. Finally, the Council's supreme arbiter, an ancient ethereal whose species had mediated galactic conflicts for millennia, spoke in a voice like distant wind chimes. Warrior Moonwhisper, your testimony has been most enlightening. However, I must ask you directly, do you still maintain that the humans committed war crimes? Zektar stood silent for a moment, his forearms trembling slightly. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before, filled with a confusion that had clearly been growing throughout his testimony. Honored Arbiter, he began slowly, I came here to demand justice for the violations committed against my people. I expected this council to condemn the humans for their refusal to follow the sacred laws of warfare that have governed galactic civilization for thousands of years. He paused, his golden eyes scanning the faces of the assembled delegates. But as I have spoken these words aloud, as I have seen the confusion and concern in your faces, I have begun to realize something that terrifies me more than any weapon. The chamber held its breath as Zektar continued. What if the humans were not committing atrocities? What if they were showing us something we have never seen before? A way of warfare that seeks to preserve rather than destroy, to heal rather than harm, to build bridges rather than burn them? A collective gasp arose from the assembled delegates. For a Velnari warrior to question the sacred traditions of his own culture was unprecedented. I have spent these months since my escape trying to understand what I witnessed, Zektar said, his voice growing stronger. I have studied human history, their literature, their philosophy. What I found there has shaken me to my very core. The holographic display activated once more, showing scenes from human history. Images of former enemies becoming allies, of wars ending in reconciliation rather than domination, of societies rebuilding after conflict stronger than before. The humans have fought many wars among themselves, Zektar continued. But what makes them unique is not how they fight, but how they end their conflicts. Time and again, they have turned bitter enemies into close allies through understanding, forgiveness, and mutual respect. The display showed specific examples. Former enemies working together after devastating conflicts. Memorials that honored all who died, regardless of which side they fought for. And societies that had learned to celebrate diversity rather than fear it. At this moment, the human ambassador rose from her seat. Sarah Chen was a small woman with graying hair and intelligent eyes that had seen both the horrors and wonders that humans were capable of creating. Honored Council, Ambassador Chen said, her voice calm but carrying clearly through the vast chamber. I request permission to address the allegations made against my species. The Supreme Arbiter gestured for her to proceed. The other delegates leaned forward, eager to hear the human response to Zektar's extraordinary testimony. Everything Warrior Moonwhisper has described is accurate, Ambassador Chen began, causing another wave of surprised murmurs through the chamber. We did refuse to kill defeated enemies. We did provide medical care to wounded prisoners. We did build memorials to honor those who fought against us. We did treat captives with dignity and respect, rather than punishment and shame. She paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. But I would ask this council to consider whether these actions constitute crimes or represent a different understanding of what warfare should be. The display behind her shifted to show images of Earth's history. The devastation of global wars, the aftermath of conflicts that had consumed entire generations, and the long journey toward a more peaceful world. My species learned through bitter experience that hatred begets hatred, that cruelty breeds more cruelty, and that wars fought for domination rather than principle serve no one well. Ambassador Chen continued. We discovered that true victory comes not from destroying your enemies, but from understanding what drove them to conflict in the first place. She gestured toward Zektar, who stood listening with obvious internal struggle. The Velnari attacked our mining station because they believed we were trespassing on their territory. They followed their cultural traditions of honorable warfare, seeking glorious death in battle. We could have given them what they wanted. We could have fought until all were dead, and nothing was resolved. The display showed alternative scenarios. What the Battle of Kepler Station might have looked like if fought according to traditional galactic rules of warfare. Ships destroyed, crews dead, families mourning, and the underlying territorial dispute left unresolved. Instead, Ambassador Chen continued, we chose a different path. We sought to preserve life rather than destroy it, to understand our enemies rather than simply defeat them, and to find solutions that served everyone's needs rather than just our own. She turned to address Zektar directly. Warrior Moonwhisper, you speak of the shame your people feel at surviving defeat, but I would ask you to consider this. What if survival is not shameful, but precious? What if living to build a better future is more honorable than dying to preserve the past? Zektar's composed facade finally cracked completely. Tears flowed down his scaled cheeks as he struggled with concepts that challenged everything he had been taught to believe. I have seen your memorial to our dead, he said, his voice breaking. I have watched your children learning about our culture with respect, rather than hatred. I have met my fellow warriors who have found new purpose and meaning in your society. Part of me understands that what you offer is beautiful, but accepting it means abandoning everything my people have believed for centuries. Ambassador Chen's expression softened with genuine compassion. Change is never easy, Warrior Moonwhisper. But growth requires letting go of ideas that no longer serve us well. Your people's courage and honor are admirable qualities, but perhaps they could be directed toward building rather than destroying, toward protecting the weak rather than glorifying death. The Supreme Arbiter spoke again, his ancient voice thoughtful. This case has raised questions that go far beyond the actions of any single species. If the humans are correct, then our entire approach to warfare may be fundamentally flawed. Other delegates began to speak, their voices reflecting the confusion and concern that filled the chamber. The Gornaki representative wondered aloud whether his people's traditional approach to conflict had caused unnecessary suffering. The Theknari ambassador questioned whether their emphasis on decisive victory had prevented lasting peace. As the debate continued, Zektar made a decision that shocked everyone present. He walked across the chamber to where Ambassador Chen stood, and slowly extended one of his 4 hands in the human gesture of greeting. Ambassador Chen, he said, his voice steady despite his tears, I came here to condemn your species for violating the laws of civilized warfare. Instead, I find myself questioning whether those laws themselves are truly civilized. He paused, looking around the chamber at the assembled delegates. I request asylum with the human delegation. I wish to learn more about your ways, to understand how a species can choose mercy over vengeance and still remain strong. The chamber erupted in surprised voices as delegates struggled to process this unprecedented request. Never before had a member of one species requested to join another during formal proceedings. Ambassador Chen accepted Zektar's hand with a warm smile. You are welcome among us, Warrior Moonwhisper. But I would suggest that rather than joining just humanity, you help us all learn how to be better. The Supreme Arbiter called for order, and gradually the chamber quieted. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of millennia of experience. This case has revealed something remarkable, the ancient ethereal said. The humans stand accused of showing mercy to enemies, of preserving life rather than destroying it, of seeking understanding rather than domination. If these are crimes, then perhaps it is our definition of civilization that needs examination. He paused, letting his words resonate through the chamber. I propose that this council establish a new committee to study alternative approaches to conflict resolution based on the human model of restorative rather than destructive warfare. The vote that followed was not unanimous, but it was decisive. Species after species voted to reform their approach to warfare, to emphasize preservation over destruction, understanding over hatred. As the session concluded, Zektar stood beside Ambassador Chen, no longer accuser but an advocate for change. His testimony had begun as an indictment of human cruelty but had become something far more powerful. A call for all galactic civilization to evolve beyond its ancient prejudices and embrace a better way forward. The true atrocity, as it turned out, was not what the humans had done to their enemies, but what galactic civilization had accepted as normal for far too long. The humans had not violated the laws of civilized warfare. They had shown that those laws themselves were barbaric relics of a less enlightened age. In the weeks that followed, the Committee for Peaceful Conflict Resolution would begin the long work of transforming how the galaxy approached warfare. It would not be easy, and not all species would embrace the changes immediately. But the foundation had been laid for a future where conflicts could be resolved through understanding rather than annihilation. Zektar Moonwhisper, once a proud Velnari warrior seeking glorious death in battle, became the committee's first chairman. His transformation from accuser to advocate would inspire countless others to question their own assumptions about honor, courage, and what it truly means to be civilized. The humans, as it turned out, had committed the ultimate atrocity against galactic civilization. They had forced it to become better than it was.